Hi there, it is Eating Disorder Awareness Week, and so this week I'm using my space, if you will, to provide some education on different eating disorders that come from the DSM. They're not to be used to diagnose yourself. You do need to see a professional to do that, but this is for education and to learn signs and symptoms for yourself or somebody else and just general education. I post this in Intuitive Eating Free Education, which is a free book, free group I host on Facebook. It's on my Counseling with Sarah Nielsen page. It's on my July Moon page on Instagram and YouTube channel, Tales of a Psychotherapist. And so we've talked about pica, ARFID, rumination, anorexia. And today we're going to focus on bulimia. And tomorrow we will talk about binge eating. And then I've got some really exciting topics coming up that I'm going to be recording and posting. And so if you're interested in those, please follow, join the group, whatever applies to whatever space you're in right now. Okay, so let's look at bulimia nervosa. Again, this is not to diagnose yourself. Okay. Let me grab my glasses. It's my husband. Okay. So, bulimia nervosa is characterized by recurrent episodes of binge eating. And let's talk about what is binge eating. So, I hear people often say, I binge ate. And I think that it's important to distinguish the difference between binge eating and overeating, because I think for a lot of people, it falls more in the overeating versus binge eating. And I think it is important to distinguish it, because I think that when you have a realistic view or an accurate view of what's happening, it can help reduce shame and guilt. And there's a lot of that in eating disorders. So that's a big journey, is reducing that. Anyway, so let's see, what is binge eating? So it is eating in a discrete period of time, for example, an hour, 2 hours, an amount of food that is larger than what most people would eat in a similar amount of time. So for example, you're comparing, I don't like that word, but that's just where we're at. You're comparing, okay, what would the average person eat in example? There's just a 2-hour frame. Are you eating more than what most people would eat in a 2-hour frame? Is there a sense of lack of control? Like you feel like you can't stop eating, you can't control what you're eating, how much you're eating, very out of control feeling. There can be recurrent inappropriate compensatory behaviors to prevent weight gain. So what does that mean? Okay, that might mean somebody who is inducing vomiting. That's what we always think of with bulimia, but actually the expelling of food compensatory behaviors are not always purging, okay? But it can be purging. It can be laxatives, diuretics, other medications, fasting, over-exercising. There's a lot of different ways that happens. And then it gets into a little more details of, this is how long it has to go on for, this is how many times it has to happen to qualify. I don't think that's important. What I think is important is knowing that bulimia nervosa is characterized by binge eating and then ways to expel that in some unhealthy way. So some of the signs and symptoms can be things I talked about yesterday with the anorexia. Some of these signs and symptoms are universal to any eating disorder. When you see people avoiding food, avoiding meals with people, making excuses, I already ate, I'm going to eat later, going to the bathroom right after eating. Does it mean every person who goes to the bathroom right after they eat are engaged in bulimia? No. You got to look at frequency. We have to practice common sense about this and put it on a spectrum. And something else I was going to say and I lost it. I want to just talk about a few other things that the DSM highlights. Number one is a person with bulimia may be of average weight or overweight. We often mistake weight for eating disorders. When you see somebody who's quite frail, you think they have an eating disorder. They may. They could have a medical issue. And then we see somebody who's average weight or overweight and we think they don't have an eating disorder. You absolutely can have an eating disorder. It's not based off weight. So some complications with bulimia, and many of these complications also can happen with anorexia. Menstrual irregularity. I talked about this yesterday. That's a big one with anorexia, by the way. I talked about this one yesterday with anorexia, but this can happen with this bulimia as well. Fluid electrolyte disturbances. And additionally, with bulimia, due to purging, you can do a lot of esophagus damage, gastrointestinal damage, and the body is very repairing, but there is obviously levels of damage that can happen that cannot be reversed. You have acid constantly coming up. It's eroding things. Bulimia commonly occurs in adolescence or young adulthood. I think that's another thing, is we don't think to look to our young, and I'm going to say girls because it's mostly with girls. Men are affected by eating disorders too. But we commonly overlook our youth with eating disorders. It is happening younger and younger. I'm talking elementary school, okay? So you got to be on the lookout for a lot of ages. So it can begin in adolescence or young adulthood. I want to wrap this up time-wise. I'm sorry for taking so much more time. It does happen more commonly in women, and I just want to mention a couple more things when we talk about gender. Eating disorders absolutely happen in males. They do. And particularly male sports that involve cutting weight, wrestling, MMA, swimming, boxing. And there is a higher propensity for eating disorders with women athletes as well, particularly dancing, gymnastics, cheer, people who model. There are a lot of professions and athletes that have a higher chance of it happening. And so those are just some things to be aware of. I'm here to answer questions. Please comment any questions you have, something I didn't touch on. If you have a video idea you want to hear about, message or drop a comment. Follow, and let's bring about the awareness during this week, and let's keep bringing that awareness year round. Thank you so much.